Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for our Staffing Your Third-Party Risk Management Program webinar. My name is Abby Clark, and I will be your host. On your screen, you should see multiple widgets that you can use, including Ask Question, Media Player, Slides, Related Content, Speaker Bio, Request Demo, and Help. If you are not familiar with our webinars, all of the widget boxes are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to maximize your screen space. At the bottom of your screen in the toolbar are icon buttons you can use to show and hide those widgets. You can expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right-hand corner of that widget. If you experience any issues or have technical questions, you can use the Help widget or submit them along with any other questions through the Ask Question widget. Don't worry, we do capture all questions throughout each session. We will be answering some of them live during the webcast, but for those we do not have a chance to answer live, we will address with you via email. Today's live session is eligible for 1 CPE credit. If you wish to receive this credit, please remember to be logged in individually with your own credentials. Answer all 3 of the polling questions that will appear on your screen during today's presentation. Be in attendance for the entire 1-hour live session and complete the follow-up survey. We will be sending the link to that follow-up survey 24 hours after this live session. If you meet all requirements, we'll be sending you your CPE certificate within 7 to 10 business days following survey submission. With us today, we have Hillary Dewhurst, Venminder's Head of Third-Party Risk Education and Advocacy. She will discuss the factors your organization must consider to appropriately staff your third-party risk management function. You'll also see a link to a copy of today's slide deck, a link to our website, a link to our samples library, links to our How Many People Should You Dedicate to Third-Party Risk Management ebook, our How to Use the RACI Method to Determine Third-Party Risk Management Responsibilities infographic and template, our Training New Vendor Owners checklist, as well as a link to our library of additional resources, all within the Related Content widget. So with all that being said, I'd like to hand it over to Hillary. Hillary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abby. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. We have a great session today, and we're going to start off and just open our discussion with what the third-party risk management staff and stakeholder functions are, including their roles and responsibilities. And then we'll get into what we should be doing around training and education for those staff members and stakeholders. We'll also talk about some outsourcing strategies if we need to use that as a way to supplement our third-party risk management program. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways. So let's get started. You know, there's a saying we use a lot that third-party risk management is a team sport. So who's really involved in the practice of third-party risk management? Well, from the top, you have your board of directors and your senior management, as well as your internal audit group. We also sometimes see external auditors and examiners, but internally, we really do have our core third-party risk management team and our subject matter experts. But we also need the participation of those lines of business or business units and the folks in those lines of business, which we typically refer to as the vendor owner. Of course, we have our vendors and their vendors as well. All right, so let's take each of these roles and responsibilities and kind of break them into groups by function. Now, we are going to start today with the oversight function, which really includes the board of directors who set that tone from the top and hold management accountable for making sure that third-party risk management is executed efficiently and effectively and helps protect the organization and its customers. Senior management, on the other hand, is responsible for that execution. That means that they're holding the right people accountable for fulfilling their roles and responsibilities, and that they're addressing the risks that are discovered in the vendor portfolio. They also are responsible for ensuring that there's enough and appropriate resources, including skilled people, tools, technology, money, whatever it takes to make sure that the program can function effectively. From an oversight perspective, we also see your internal audit team. And these are the folks that are responsible for reviewing the third-party risk management program, making sure that it is in compliance with all laws and regulations, and that it's performing effectively. If there's any gaps or issues, they are usually reported to management and the board for correction. Now, externally, we may see additional external auditors, those that maybe you hire, those from certifying bodies, and regulatory examiners. And these folks are basically there to make sure that your organization is in compliance with either the standards they're setting or the regulations that they're there to enforce. They might identify violations and recommend corrective actions. Of course, when they do identify something, that becomes documented and is provided to the board and management for closure. So the next group of stakeholders are really your third-party risk management team and your associated subject matter experts. So the team is the group that is tasked with developing, implementing, and maintaining your third-party risk management framework. And when we say framework, that means all the rules, tools, and requirements that you need to manage third-party risk management effectively. They are responsible for the policy, all the systems, workflows, everything that makes third-party risk management possible at the organization. They're also responsible for managing issues related to third-party risk management. Your subject matter experts may be within the third-party risk management group, or they may be peppered throughout the organization, but these are the folks that we engage to provide qualified opinion regarding a vendor's risk management practices and controls. We engage them a lot during due diligence, as well as to be consultants on how the program operates, what kind of questions we should be asking, what kind of documents we should collect, and they play a major role in reviewing and confirming issue mitigation. So this brings us to the business units, line of business, essentially what we refer to as first line functions. And the business units are the ones that are responsible for the products and services that we're engaging the vendors to provide. And they need to manage those relationships in accordance to the policy and the rules and requirements as established by third-party risk management. Vendor owners usually sit in that line of business, and those are the ones that have the one-to-one relationship directly with that vendor, and they are responsible for performing all the necessary risk management activities, which might include completing that inherent risk assessment, gathering due diligence documentation with the vendor, performing periodic risk identification and reassessment, as well as due diligence. And of course, they're responsible for monitoring risk and performance. So now that we understand the different kinds of roles and responsibilities associated with third-party risk management, let's really talk about that third-party risk management team and how to staff it appropriately. I mean, that's why we're all here today. So here's a couple things we want to help you really understand, that it's not just about how many people you need or what tools you need to do that effectively, but there's other considerations as well, such as which industry you're in, what type of regulatory requirements you're responsible for, what your organizational structure looks like and how mature your third-party risk management function is, which third-party risk management model you're using, and what kind of tools and resources you actually have to do that. Of course, we need to think about the total number of vendors under management and really think about the number of critical vendors. Now, of course, the industry you're in also matters. For example, if you're in an industry that has more prescriptive regulatory requirements, it's likely that you'll have more work to do and more checks that you need to perform, which may mean more people. Some industries like financial services, healthcare, and technology have pretty mature and robust regulatory frameworks surrounding third-party risk management, while some like manufacturing and retail don't have as many. Honestly, your industry norms and regulatory requirements will really help you shape what actual work your third-party risk management team needs to do. Another important factor to consider is how mature your organization is from a risk culture perspective. That's because in cultures where risk management is a core competency and people are generally aware, we're going to have better risk outcomes and people are going to be more proactive. However, if you are in an organization where risk is not a really mature concept, it's not something we're talking about all the time, you may find that you have more work to do because people are less educated or aware, and in some cases not held accountable. So that risk culture will also factor into how to staff your program. Now, the specific operating model you use will also dramatically impact how many people you need. So in a decentralized model, there is no third-party risk management team, and there's no centralized oversight. In this model, third-party responsibilities are just kind of peppered throughout the organization, which often means there's not always a lot of consistency on what one business unit or team is doing may be different than another. In the centralized model, all third-party risk management work is handled by the same team. That means not only the framework of third-party risk management is handled by that team, but also the actual management of the vendors themselves. They also would be responsible for all of the vendor risk reviews and issue mitigation, et cetera. Now, in a hybrid team, what we see is a established third-party risk management team who's basically responsible for the framework and for oversight. We see subject matter experts that can be located in a variety of different teams. We have some from compliance, some from information security, some from legal, etc. The vendor owners are actually in the lines of business, and they're responsible for handling the activities related to identifying, managing, and monitoring vendor risks. Now, of course, operating models can and do change. What we've seen a lot is where an organization might start off in that decentralized model, right? Third-party risk management isn't that mature yet. So everybody's kind of doing the best they can to meet the requirements. But over time, because there's no centralized management or oversight, things start becoming inconsistent, which can raise a lot of issues and really emphasize that more control and rigor are needed. As a knee-jerk reaction to that, sometimes everybody goes directly to the centralized model where one team or business unit is responsible for everything, including the risk and performance management of the vendor. Now, this can work okay for a little while, but as the vendor populations grow or those relationships become more complex, it starts becoming a little overwhelming. Additionally, without that direct input or accountability from the person in the organization who's actually working directly with that vendor, some risks go unnoticed. Things don't always make it over the finish line. So the best organization that we've seen or model is the hybrid model, where the third-party risk management team is defined and distinct. They're responsible for the framework, being those rules, tools, and processes that make third-party risk management possible at the organization. They are responsible for oversight and reporting, raising issues, and making sure that the vendor owners are actually performing the activities on time and with the expected quality. Now, we're going to take a break from this for just a moment for a poll question. Abby?
And this brings us to the first poll question of the day. You should see the poll question now in the slides area. If you have any issues, please feel free to send us a message using the Ask Question widget, and we will be happy to assist. As a reminder, if you wish to receive the CPE credit for today's session, you must answer all poll questions and be in attendance for the entire live session. And this poll question is, which third-party risk management operating model is used in your organization? Decentralized, centralized, hybrid, another model, we don't do TPRM, not sure. And Hillary, it looks like we have some time right now to answer one of the questions that have come in from the audience.
All right.
And that question is, do you typically see supply chain teams performing vendor risk management functions if there is no other dedicated team?
So first of all, there's really not what we typically see. But the question you're asking about is, yes, that is an approach that some organizations take, just for the reasons that those supply chain team members are usually working with vendors. They have a good sense of what they do. So it is a logical assignment if there is no one else. Where it gets tricky is making sure that there's no potential conflicts of interest. So for example, we don't necessarily want the same team who's awarding work to be the same team that is making sure that the risks are being managed appropriately. So it can fall within the same organization, but that separation of duties does become important so that the vendor risk management, third-party risk management team can remain neutral and impartial so they can do their job well. I hope that helps.
Thanks, everyone, for answering that poll question. Here are those results. And by the way, you may have noticed reactions such as a thumbs up or a heart coming across the screen. If you find this feature distracting, you can turn it off by clicking the 4 arrows in the top right-hand corner of the Slides widget, which will expand the slides to full screen and no longer show the reactions. And quickly, before we move on, just a reminder that in the related content widget, you'll find our How Many People Should You Dedicate to Third-Party Risk Management ebook. This resource walks you through different factors to consider when determining the amount of staff for your organization. With that, I will hand it back over to Hillary.
So coming back to those operating models, one question before you start thinking about staffing your program is the operating model that we're using working? So are the right people with the right skill sets performing the activities, right? Do the vendor owners and other stakeholders really understand their responsibility and fulfill their role? Does the model you're using really promote and enforce stakeholder accountability? That's a big one. And, how much rework are we doing? Are things often late? Are there a lot of mistakes? And finally, how well are the resources being used? So do we have way too much work, or do we have too much downtime? That one I've never heard of, but it could happen. So these are all things to think about in that process. So of course, the number and quality of third-party risk management staff members you have is really important. But it's also important to think about the tools and resources you use to get the work done. So for example, making sure you have risk-based processes so that you're not treating every single vendor relationship the same and you're paying the most attention, spending the most time on the highest risk vendors. Making sure that you have a dedicated third-party risk management platform as opposed to using multiple spreadsheets. That is very error-prone and takes a lot of time. It's also hard to generate reporting and stuff. So a software platform can help you be more effective. When it comes to resources, we really do need qualified subject matter experts for each risk domain to make sure that our vendor risk reviews are happening appropriately and that we're getting a good qualified opinion. Other resources like risk intelligence and monitoring can supplement your due diligence and really help you with your monitoring practices. Of course, education and training are really important, as are responsible and accountable vendor owners. So last but not least, how many vendors you have matters, right? The more vendors you have, the more time and resources it's going to take to manage them. That's just a fact. But if you're using those risk-based processes, you can probably refine those requirements and the time needed to address each vendor relationship. Of course, your critical vendors always require the most attention, the most rigorous due diligence, the most carefully written contracts, the most fastidious risk and performance monitoring. So the more critical vendors you have, again, that's going to need additional resources. Also, the types of products and services that your organization is using can help influence what is needed to manage them. So if you're using a lot of very complex, data-heavy, PII, compliance, requirement-related products and services, that's going to just take more to manage than, say, office supplies. Now that brings us to the staff quantity formula. Now, to be honest, this is more of a guideline than an actual formula. It is going to assume a few things about your organization. One, that you have up to about 15% of your total vendor population is considered critical. Now, this is high risk and critical, but we're really just talking about critical here. And it also assumes that you're using some automated third-party risk management platform as opposed to using spreadsheets and emails to gather all that information. Now, the guideline is for every about 300 vendors, 1 to 3 FTE, 3 to 5 for up to 500, and about an additional FTE for every 200 vendors beyond that. Now, I can hear a lot of you already thinking, well, I'm just a team of 1, and that's not uncommon. But the reason this is not optimal is because you have to be able to have some reasonable backup if you go on vacation or win the lottery or take another role within the organization. Now, also keep in mind that across that third-party lifecycle, there are multiple tasks and activities that third-party risk management has to provide oversight to. So if you think about all your vendors and all those activities, it really doesn't seem like too many folks. Now, again, if this is something that's not possible or you don't have enough work for a single FTE, we can think about outsourcing some of these tasks, which we will describe a little bit later in the presentation. In any case, you want to make sure you have enough resources. So while we've given you that guideline to work with, the truth is there really is no ideal number because every organization is unique. Again, there are so many considerations and they do want to review them. So let's check in on how many vendors we have. Right? If we have a large vendor population and a significant amount of them are high risk or critical, that's just going to take more time and attention. Therefore, we might need more people. If we're not using automated platforms and we're really thinking about how many spreadsheets we have to fill in and reports we have to manually generate and all the emails we have to track and manage, that's going to take more people. But another important consideration is if the people that are responsible for the work have the right skills and if they're being used appropriately. So let's take somebody who's a super experienced third-party risk manager who can be doing really high-level strategic things, but is spending all their time really making sure that due diligence documents are in or that inherent risk assessments have been completed. They're not going to have as much time to do that higher level, more strategic work. And again, more people might be necessary. But even if you have really qualified people on your third-party risk management team, if your stakeholders aren't held accountable for their responsibilities, that usually means more work for your third-party risk management team. So for example, if your vendor owner isn't really doing performance management very well, that means that your team is going back and looking at that, having a lot of back and forth, and in some organizations end up doing it themselves. The other question would be, how much is your business growing? Are you adding a lot of new vendors? Are you kind of stable? You know, some organizations actually have initiatives to reduce the number of vendors they have. So that's something important to consider. Now, we know that it's hard to predict these things, but looking at your last 6 months to a year and sort of knowing the business initiatives that are out there for your company can help you really determine if, yes, we might need some more people. Okay, so while it's really easy to say all the reasons that we might need extra people or this many people, it's just as important to understand what happens if we're understaffed. Now, one of the biggest issues that can arise is underperformance. right? If we have too much work on our plate, too many things to do, something's going to give. Now, in this example, we use a critical vendor, and the vendor owner may not be doing exactly what we need them to in terms of performance management. Maybe there's been an issue that really hasn't come to our attention because we're too busy doing something else. Well, without the ability to pay attention to that and hold that vendor owner accountable and make sure that issue gets resolved, we might see it become a very big problem down the road, all because we were too busy. Now, in another example, an issue with understaffing could be delayed risk reviews or risk re-reviews. Now, it's not just about risk reviews, it's about any time-bound required activity. But in this example, let's say that your one and only third-party risk management person is very caught up in trying to quickly onboard a new critical vendor. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on. They're working very closely with the vendor owner and the line of business and all the SMEs, and it's eating up all their time. Meanwhile, other critical vendors that are due for risk reviews may not get done on time. As a result, maybe their business continuity management plan was not tested and there's an incident. When the regulators come in and want explanations, it's going to be difficult to say we didn't have time to do everything at once. Now, while you're thinking about that, I think it's time for another poll question. Abby?
Our second poll question of the day is, how many people do you have dedicated to TPRM at your organization? 1, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 or more. We don't have a TPRM team, or you're not sure. And Hillary, I have another question here that I think we could go ahead and answer.
Sure.
And that question is, our product managers are supposed to be responsible for managing vendor performance, but this has been a big struggle because most of them don't do it consistently. What do you suggest for improving that situation?
Well, you're not alone. A lot of folks struggle with getting their assigned vendor owners to fulfill their responsibilities, but there are a couple things you can do. The first thing is to really work with your management to reinforce that tone from the top. Make sure that it's a known expectation would be my first suggestion. But another thing that you can do is work with your HR department and your management to start implementing a few vendor risk management KPIs or KRIs that fall on that person's performance plan. If we don't measure that, it's not likely going to get done. And if their compensation and their overall performance rating isn't also inclusive of that work, chances are it's just not going to be a priority for them. So those are the two things that I would start off with. Also, make sure that they are really educated and know how to do the work, so that they don't have a lot of excuses not to do it. I hope that's helpful, and good luck.
Okay, here are those results. Thanks again, everyone, for taking the time to answer the poll. I'd like to quickly direct your attention to the related content widget, where you will find our How to Use the RACI method to determine third-party risk management responsibilities, infographic, and template. Hillary, I will pass it back to you to continue with the presentation.
Now that you've answered the survey, let's see where you stack up against the industry. According to our last State of Third-Party Risk Management survey, almost a quarter, 24%, have zero dedicated FTE for third-party risk management. But more than half, 61%, have somewhere in the range of 1 to 5 employees. So if you're in that range, you're pretty normal and tracking against what most programs are seeing. Okay, let's shift the discussion a little bit to start talking about titles, roles, and functions. Now, the big disclaimer that we have to use in every webinar is no two organizations are alike. What works for one may not work for another. So you can't get stuck on, what industry norms are. You really have to think about what works in your organization. The other thing to keep in mind is when there are fewer people doing the work, those specific titles become a little less meaningful, because whether it's the director of the program or an analyst, somebody doing everything still needs the right opportunities, pay, and visibility to make sure that they have appropriate job advancement and performance management. Also, in very large organizations, your HR department has probably gone through multiple exercises to create a whole listing of groups of job titles and functions and roles. They don't always necessarily align well with the responsibilities of third-party risk management. So if you're trying to select something out of your corporate functions list and it's not working, talk to your HR department to see if you can create a new one or find something more appropriate. And then finally, no matter what titles you're using in your team, no matter what titles you're using in your organization, it is still important to have a separate and documented list of job descriptions, roles, and responsibilities for each person on the team. Okay, so let's look at some proposed titles. Now, keep in mind these sort of align to a larger organization that already has some risk management titles embedded in their HR titles and descriptions. So let's start off with an analyst level 1 and level 2. These are generally entry levels to folks with about 2 years of experience. And we really depend on these folks for workflow management, more administrative tasks, such as scheduling and tracking those key dates, looking at the vendor inventory, coordinating subject matter expert reviews, doing system support, maybe supporting your training and education efforts, and coordinating vendor reputation reviews such as OFAC. Now from there, we see a manager level, which is generally about 2 to 4 years, and they might be reviewing those inherent risk assessments for accuracy, maybe providing some credible challenge to them. They'd be responsible for report writing and analysis, process management, tracking compliance, supporting specific business lines or vendor portfolios. So maybe you have somebody who is assigned to your information security or technology products and services. They also could be doing project management, training and education, some quality control testing, and product or service portfolio management. Now, a senior manager would have 4 or more years of experience, and that's when we really say, yes, they're supervising others, they have all the manager skills, but at a more advanced level. They're really doing more data management and analysis. They're also doing regulatory analysis and interpretation. They're working on audit and exam prep, issue analysis, escalation and management, supervising the closure of those issues, and managing enterprise-wide third-party risk management improvement efforts. Now, at the top of the team, or the person representing the program overall, we have like a director or program manager, and these folks generally should have about 7+ years of experience, because they're really setting the strategic direction for third-party risk management, and they're accountable for the health and effectiveness of the program. They are establishing and maintaining the policy and presenting all of that reporting, issue escalation, conversations with board and management, as well as risk committees. They're managing the third-party risk management budget. They're figuring out what improvement projects are going to happen, and they're collaborating with business line executives. So when it comes to roles and responsibilities, sometimes there's a little bit of overlap. Some things are not always very clear. That is why I like to take it a step further and use the RACI method to define who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for every task and activity that we do. So the responsible person is the one who actually is doing the work. The accountable person is the one that has the ultimate ownership or can make decisions, but they have authority over that task. Someone who's consulted is someone that needs to provide input or contribute to the activity in some way, and we need to have two-way documented conversation with them. On the other hand, someone who's informed is merely informed of the activity. They don't necessarily have a quote-unquote say in the matter, but they do need to know. So by using this method, we can clearly break out the roles and responsibilities as they apply to each task. Now, the most effective way to execute your RACI methodology is to create a matrix. You can do this really simply in Excel or Word or whatever works for you, with the very furthest left column being the activity or the responsibility, a description, and then listing out each of the stakeholders. For each activity, you want to list who's responsible and accountable, consulted if necessary, and informed if necessary. Now, every activity should have at least a responsible and accountable, and sometimes those might be the same person. So for example, in this first one, we're registering new vendors on the third-party risk management system. That might be one of your analysts. Their manager then approves it. You are consulting with the line of business to make sure they're aware that everything's up and running, and you may just let accounts payable know so they can compare it to their list and make sure that those folks are on their radar. So while we've talked about titles and roles and responsibilities and how to document them, let's start talking about the team members themselves. Now, one thing that's really important, and I like to call out when anyone will let me, is that it's not easy to be a good third-party risk management professional. It takes a lot more than just basic business skills and experience. And that's because of all the different roles of a third-party risk management professional may play in their organization. So we have to be a process designer, a relationship manager, an analyst, a teacher, a regulatory expert, an auditor, an organizer, etc. It's a very broad range of skills and experiences that a third-party risk management professional needs to bring to work with them every single day. Okay, considering everything that we need to know and be to be successful in third-party risk management, you can basically break out those skills and experiences into three tranches. So the first one is basic business skills, right? Project management, communication, report writing, process design and execution, right? They should have good foundations there. We also want to pay attention to what they know about third-party risk management and their experience with it. So do they understand the life cycle? Can they effectively identify and analyze third-party risks? Do they know the laws and regulations governing your industry? Do they understand what the other stakeholders would do in the context of third-party risk management at the organization? But the last one, and one we don't talk about enough, are the soft skills. Now, this is because we really focus on business and third-party risk management, but without strong emotional intelligence and social awareness, it makes it kind of hard to navigate all the personalities in an organization that you'll be dealing with. We also have to have really great relationship management and collaboration so that we can foster trust and partnership with all of these folks, both internally and externally. We need to be really good problem solvers and have excellent follow-through. But more than that, there has to be a passion for learning because of all the new and emerging risks. We have to constantly be on the lookout and become educated every single day. Another thing that we have to be really focused on is being detail-oriented and our commitment to improvement, right? We do not succeed if we're just happy with the status quo, happy being static. So those are definitely some attributes to look for. Okay, so as we're looking for the perfect staff members, it's really important to keep in mind that most third-party risk management professionals have learned on the job. That's because there's not a college degree program in third-party risk management, even though that topic might be covered in business administration or risk management overall. There's nothing to really substitute for that first-hand experience. Now, keep in mind, there are a few industry organizations and other organizations that do offer certification, but the prerequisites for that are usually a few years of experience. So as we're talking about skills and expertise, keep in mind that you might have a really qualified individual who comes without that specific third-party risk management experience. And there are plenty of different professions or roles that do transfer really well. So any risk management discipline, compliance, sourcing and supply chain management are great. Your cybersecurity folks are great. Folks from operational management or business continuity and disaster recovery, those are all excellent backgrounds to transfer well into third-party risk management. Keeping that in mind, we still want people to come to that interview prepared. So we should, beyond our normal slate of interview questions, think about questions that can help us really understand if they have a good sense of third-party risk management issues for your industry, what their risk culture is like from what they're coming from. Is it very mature, holding people accountable with lots of processes, or is it more of the Wild West? Another thing I like to assess is if people have a rules mentality, meaning that yes, while we have to enforce a lot of rules and requirements in third-party risk management, sometimes we need a little bit of flexibility to get to the best outcomes. Additionally, we might want to ask them if they can answer who our customers are. So if you're in the hybrid model, your customers are always the first line, the business unit. Remember, third-party risk management is there to also enable the business. Now, regardless if they've had third-party risk management experience before or not, we want to make sure that everybody gets the same comprehensive training in that new role at your organization. We want to make sure that we're explaining what the risk culture is like, those team roles and responsibilities, really walk through the life cycle and all the activities, any regulatory guidance, what criteria do you use to determine what's critical, how your risk ratings work. Really give them a good look at all the risk assessments and questionnaires and due diligence documents. Make sure they understand the risk acceptance and exceptions process, and of course giving them training on your systems. But one I really like to emphasize is record keeping and version control, because all of our processes need to be auditable. Now, of course, training for our staff is only one part of the equation. We have to often train our stakeholders, especially vendor owners. If they're new to that role and responsibility, or even if they've done it in some capacity at another organization, we still want to make sure that they have good comprehensive training and education. And I always like to remind people to start with explaining the why. Before you teach them anything else, teach them why third-party risk management is important to your organization and why it's important to their success as a vendor owner or a product manager within their line of business and to the organization overall. Make sure you identify the what, so really be clear about all the tools that your program uses to enable third-party risk management. So go ahead and walk through the system, explain an inherent risk assessment, teach them about due diligence. And then finally, when you've gotten those two concepts nailed, then you teach them how to do it, how to go in and actually fill out an inherent risk assessment or register a vendor or pull a report from your system. So again, explain the why, identify the what, and then teach the how. Now, when you are thinking about your staffing, you may not have the option to just add FTE. Additionally, you may not have enough work to justify another full-time FTE. That's where outsourcing comes into the picture. There are multiple third-party risk management services firms that can offer everything from due diligence document collection to subject matter expert reviews, which means your team has more bandwidth, your higher skill employees can focus on more strategic activities, and the work is still getting done on time and with the expected quality. So when you're thinking about outsourcing as a potential strategy, it's always really important to evaluate internal versus external and what you really need. Now, one thing that comes up a lot is budgeting and cost, and research shows that the cost of employing a full-time employee is actually about 1.4 times their salary. So that's an important number to keep in mind. It's also important to know that if there's specialized industry expertise that's needed, you're probably going to pay more for that. Some third-party risk management professionals are so overwhelmed doing so many things that they can't really focus on their core responsibilities. And so no matter how talented they are, how much experience they have, something's going to give. So we get into that understaffed situation. So keeping all of that in mind, even your best third-party risk management person may only be an expert in a few areas. So we still need to go outside to get the right expertise that we need. So of course, outsourcing could be an excellent way to add bandwidth or get that special expertise, but it's never recommended to outsource your whole program. Essentially, you need to keep in mind that the risk management and oversight responsibilities solely belong to your organization. So that means keeping that oversight of the function in-house and the management of vendor risks. We also want to make sure that we're keeping issue management and tracking and reporting in-house so that there's not ever a disconnect about what is going on there. Now, with that, we are going to take our last poll question. Abby?
Our third and final poll question is, my organization utilizes TPRM outsourcing to alleviate administrative tasks or to access specific risk expertise. Yes, no, or not sure. And Hillary, let's go ahead and answer another question from the audience.
Sure.
And that question is, should we require professional certifications for all third-party risk management team members? Right now, only one person has a certificate.
This can be a little tricky, so there's a couple answers to this question. The first one is that third-party risk management certifications are actually, for the most part, pretty difficult to get. They require a significant amount of experience, and then there are some pretty hefty exams that go with it. Now, they're valuable because they do demonstrate that that person has the professional, credentials to perform that role. But keeping in mind that a lot of people learn third-party risk management on the job, it may be that your team members don't have that 2 to 5 years prerequisite to get those certifications. However, it can be something that they work for, and sometimes they can be quite expensive. So also keep in mind that if your organization is willing to pay for that, that can certainly be an objective or goal that they work towards. As it pertains to, do they have to be certified to actually get the job done? No, they don't. A lot of people, myself included, worked as a third-party risk management team member, director for years without actually pursuing the certification. You just want to think about what that actually means to your organization, and if you need that for an optics reason, maybe for your investors or customers, to have that extra sense of comfort around the skill level. But while I think they're definitely valuable, it's not always possible for everyone to have one, but it is something worth working for if that's possible. I hope that answers your question.
Here are those results. Thank you to everyone for answering this question, as it is interesting to see what everyone says. Before we continue, I'd like to remind everyone that we have our Training New Vendor Owners Checklist available in the related content widget. As Hillary briefly discussed to training staff and vendor owners, you'll want to grab this checklist to reference too. Back to you, Hillary.
All right, so let's wrap up our session today with some key takeaways. The biggest of which is that every organization is different and there are a lot of variables to consider. So what works for one organization may not work for another. But the model you choose is going to impact how much work you and your third-party risk management staff have to perform, which does impact the number of staff you need. Your resources and tools matter, and more vendors does equal more work. Regardless of the roles and titles, make sure that you're clearly defining what the responsibilities are and think about using that rating method. Also, keep in mind that really good third-party risk management professionals have a pretty wide range of business skills and soft skills in addition to that third-party risk management expertise. Even if you can't get that expertise, don't forget that a lot of folks learn on the job. So if you're going to take a chance on someone, make sure you have effective education and training. And finally, if you cannot add extra staff or you don't have enough work for a whole person or you need that expertise, consider outsourcing certain tasks or subject matter expert reviews to a qualified third-party risk management services company. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Abby.
Great. Thanks so much, Hillary. Before we dive into more questions and answers, I just want to thank everyone for attending. I would also like to thank Hillary for her time and for sharing some really important information. And on your screen now, you will see our upcoming webinars. On October 24th, our Understanding the Elements of Your Vendor Cybersecurity Program webinar. And on November 5th, our Using SLAs and KPIs for Effective Vendor Performance Management webinar. We hope that you will be able to join us for those sessions as well. A link to register for those sessions is in your copy of today's presentation slides. Let's now go ahead and answer some more questions that have come in during the session. Okay, Hillary, the next question I have here is this formula based on hybrid or centralized model?
Actually, it's based on a hybrid model with the assumption that you have that third-party risk management team. They're dedicated, they're owning and operating and implementing the framework, kind of keeping everyone on track, and that you have dedicated vendor owners in the business units or lines of business that are actually doing the risk identification and management work through the framework. I hope that's helpful.
Great, thanks so much. The next question I have here is, what is the ideal structure for vendor relationship owners throughout the business? Is it recommended to have a select few within each business unit, or anyone that has a vendor need is a relationship owner?
Well, a lot of it's going to depend on your specific organization. Now, using that hybrid model, when we have vendor owners in the business units, they're really the folks that are going out and saying, hey, we need to bring on this data center or this marketing firm. And ideally, those same people would be the ones managing those vendors from a third-party risk management perspective. However, in some organizations, you might have the director who's bringing on all the different folks, and that might be too much work for one person. So it is logical that you would then delegate those responsibilities to another team member or a group of team members. Just keep in mind that the folks that are working on that need to have enough experience and proficiency with that specific product or service to be able to raise red flags, to know what's normal in the industry, to be able to identify new and emerging risks, and to sufficiently manage the known risks. So again, you can have some flexibility provided those that are responsible for those relationships have that key experience and skills to manage that vendor. I hope that helps.
Perfect. Next question. Can you outsource the entire TPRM function?
You shouldn't outsource the entire TPRM function. Granted, we've talked a lot about teams of one today and being overwhelmed and outsourcing, but what we want to make sure is that there is at least one internal person that has that oversight and responsibility for third-party risk management. No external firm is going to know your company like you do, and it's also important to have an internal set of eyes and ears. Things change. We don't always communicate all those changes effectively externally. They may not know your specific strategies. So it is really important to have at least one person in the organization that has that ownership. Even if they're outsourcing due diligence, document collection, and subject matter expert reviews, and some other products and services, you cannot outsource the whole function. I hope that helped.
Great. Thanks so much, Hillary. Unfortunately, that is all of the time that we have left for questions today. Thank you, Hillary, for taking the time to address some of those that came in. Any questions we did not have time to answer today, we will address with you offline. We would like to thank you all for attending and hope you found today's session valuable. A big thank you to Hillary as well for her time and great content. And ask even more questions inside of our third-party think tank, an online community that is dedicated to third-party risk professionals and free to join. Just because today's session has ended doesn't mean the conversations and the questions must. Post your questions at www.thirdpartythinktank.com and see what your peers have to say. Within the community, you'll find thousands of free educational resources, including ones related to staffing your third-party risk management program to assist you. If you'd like to become a member of the third-party think tank, you can register on the site or shoot us an email and we'll get you registered and send you a link to set your password. We did record today's session, and that recording link will be provided to you in a follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow afternoon. Also in that follow-up email will be the survey link for you to request your CPE credit. On behalf of Inminder, it has been a pleasure. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.